Okay, welcome to Tech Tuesday number 47. And today I'm going to talk about IP strategy completely intertwined with a business strategy, which I called commitment. Might have a better name, but I'm sure you know it's not so easy to find lists of names of business strategies. And before we start, however, we will take a moment of silence. There's still 101 hostages, some of them alive, some of them not, and we want them back. So, respect. Okay, so the relationship between commitment and strategy. I even have a book, Commitment, the Dynamics of Strategy. And Porter, who's a well-known name in business strategy, wrote in the blurb for the book that large irreversible investments, in other words, commitment, is where strategy must confront reality. And why does this have to be? Well, theoretically, if you don't commit, then you might not have the resources or the focuses that you need in order to develop a strong competitive advantage. There are problems with doing it, and that's actually what this book is about. And just as two examples, hedge funds and the whole idea of an investment portfolio is basically saying we're scared to commit to one thing, so we want to have some sort of diversification. And when you have a conglomerate which has several different types of companies in it, so again, you're trying to diversify your risk, maybe cash flow, maybe market ups and downs. But the point is that even the particular mix that you select, that is a strategy, and you are kind of committed to it. Now, this is not the subject of the talk, but IP, because it's cheap, definitely relative to everything else, you can usually afford to commit to multiple alternative strategies. By commit, I mean put in large resources, and by multiple, I mean you have different pots cooking on the fire, each one has something else in it. What is this whole idea of commitment, or actually, from our perspective? So it's a business strategy. And what we're trying to do, like you do in judo, is take advantage of the competitor's momentum against them. And the reason why this is an interesting business strategy, that your competitor commits and then you do something bad to him, is just like in judo, the person providing all of the energy and all of the forces is your competitor. You have to do relatively less. So the business strategy leverages the commitment of the competitor against the competitor. The IP strategy provides leverage for the business strategy. So we have like double leverage, which of course is cool. And what I want to do, because this is a talk about IP and not about general business strategies, is I want to use this as an opportunity to show how IP can support a specific strategy. Okay, I'm going to talk only about this strategy, and I'm going to show where IP fits in it in different ways. And of course, it doesn't have to be only IP moves, but that's what I'm going to talk about. And we do have a previous discussion with the link here where we talk about how IP can give you strategic flexibility, which is kind of the cure for too much commitment. Start with the story. I checked out the story on the internet in reputable sites, but also ChatGPT told me the story after a little bit of asking it for examples. And even if it's not true, it definitely sounds good. And here's the story. Sony developed Betamax, you know, the VHS, the a video cassette format. And it was very good. And I know because I used it later on when we needed high quality video. And JVC came out with VHS, which is not very good, but it's much cheaper. And they had a battle. And somebody believed to be JVC spread rumors that even JVC believed that the big issue is quality, that that's what clients want and that's what JVC is going to work on. And what happened is that Sony doubled down on Betamax and they committed, you know, even more to Betamax than the limitations of Betamax, while JVC didn't focus on quality. Instead, they focused on new markets, which can take advantage of the fact that VHS can be 2 hours on a tape. Okay, so typical Hollywood movie, 90 minutes, 110 minutes, fits on one tape. While Betamax cannot compete in these places. Somebody noted on LinkedIn that actually the first type of movies was adult entertainment movies. The result was that JVC kicked off the rental market because if you can put a whole movie on a tape, it's much easier to rent it out. And it turns out that the customers care more about convenience than about quality. And not surprisingly, quality did get better with time. The end of the story is that beta disappeared definitely from home use. It's still, you know, used for professional, or was then used for professional. And that's it. What's interesting regarding IP here is that in order to grow more quickly, VHS licensed out the technology. By licensed out, I understand they didn't really have patents which they gave you a license, but they let people make VHS players. The result was that on the one hand, the market grows much faster for VHS. On the other hand, the quality is different. You know, some machines are better and some machines are not as good. The same story apparently happened between Sony and Sega. So both Sony and Sega were developing 3D gaming stations, you know, for playing computer games at home. And Sega believed that it's important to support 2D games and 3D games because 3D games aren't good enough and there's a lot of need for 2D games and whatever the story was. Again, spreading rumors and so on. And that made Sega develop a much more complex architecture because it had to be optimized both for 2D and 3D games. While in fact, it was enough to do 3D games, and that's what Sony did. And we all know the PlayStation and Sega simply folded that division. So we have real cases where businesses committed and were helped along in their commitment and wasn't good for them. So what is this commitment strategy? 4 stages. The first one is your competitor chooses what they're going to do. They can choose by themselves or we can help them. Second stage, the competitor gradually, usually it's gradual, commits to this decision they made. And it's common known and accepted that if you have a strategy, you need to commit to it. And once you commit to it, your resources go in that direction and then you become more committed and so on. Stage 3, the competitor becomes trapped by the commitment. Okay, if you're really committed, it's difficult to leave your commitment. When we do it to customers, we call it locking in the customer or switching costs. And it can be so bad that it might be cheaper to either shut down your relevant division or sell it. And sometimes your commitment will force the company to be at risk. And stage number 4, now that we have the competitor where we want them, we take advantage of this commitment. And the advantage could be for our benefit and or in order to cause problems to the competitor. It really depends, if you're being cooperative or nasty. So before I drill down into each one of these things, who is this competitor we're talking about? So if you look at the first column, I talk about 3 different types of competitors. A follower is somebody who will see what you're doing and do it too. A peer is somebody who is trying to break into that market, develops a device at the same time you are. And a leader is somebody who's ahead of you in the game and you want to catch up. And one of the reasons why I put this table is because your goal, what you're trying to achieve with this strategy is going to be different. And also the IP that you're going to use in order to support that will also be different. And I'll give you a more detailed filled-in table below. Now, the competitor we're talking about, first we talked about its quality, but it could be a particular competitor, okay? Often you know who your competitors are. It could be what I call a herd. If you think about flash memory devices, called colloquially disk on key, which is a trademark of M-System SanDisk. There are many different manufacturers that manufacture these little thumb drives, somebody else's trademark, that you can use. Okay, so there's a whole herd of companies that are competing with you. It's not any particular company. And there's also a future herd. If you develop a market, people will want to take advantage of it and will join it. So you will want to force them to commit to something which is bad for them or good for you, and they don't even exist yet. And of course, IP is part of the story. Let's start with the first stage. Stage number 1 is a competitor needs to choose a direction. IP can definitely help competitors make the right choice. For example, if you have a minefield, which is multiple patents in a certain technology, your competitor might say, you know what, let's not go in this direction because all directions are equal. I'm not going to go in the direction where there's a minefield. Let's say there's 2 directions. One of them is more difficult than the other. The one that's more difficult appears to be better. Well, if we keep as a secret the fact that there's a difficulty in a certain direction, your competitor might decide to go there. So don't tell people, what's difficult. And if you have blocking IP in that direction, you definitely want to keep it secret. Well, not definitely, but for this strategy, because you don't want them to avoid going in that direction. Sometimes what you do is you license technology or IP or give out money. That definitely helps competitors go in that direction. You can pretend to be going in that direction and tell everybody why it's so wonderful. Now, what's important here is you need to know, well, it's helpful if you know, how your competitor is going to make that decision. Okay, if you want to affect the decision-making process, it's very helpful if you know how that decision is made. What data will they use? What the decision process is? Who makes the decision? How quickly it happens? And all of these places are places where you can use IP to interfere or to help. And of course, you can use things that are not IP. Okay, now, as I said, the direction that you want the competitor to choose will depend on your goal for what you want to do when the competitor is trapped. And it also has to do with other ways of manipulating, but that's not the subject today. I copied this jobs to be done forces diagram. They have several different versions with more words as well. And you should consider the competitor right now to be doing the undesired behavior. And should they change to the desired behavior? Now, I'm not saying whether you want them to change or not, but what they do in the job to be done framework is they talk about forces which pull the competitor to the new behavior and forces which push or pull the competitor back to where they are now. You know, change is different. So each one of these four arrows can be either enhanced or reduced using IP. Okay, the new solution has gains, but if I have IP, you won't be able to capture the value. You might have anxieties. If I have a scary parent, maybe valueless, but scary, it's going to tell you, let's not go there. Let's stay where we are. Okay, that's just two examples. Jumping off a cliff is a commitment. We don't usually do it like the girl in the picture, but we can use IP to help the competitor make the commitment. Remember, deciding to go in a direction is one thing, but later on, you do the commitment. And in some companies, what you really have, I call it a commitment process loop. You don't decide, okay, I committed all out, we're doing things. We have some stages. You know, I do a little bit, and then I do a little bit more. And usually what you do is you ask yourself, is the direction I'm going in, does it look good? Do I see any problems now? Do I expect any problems? How much will it cost me not to continue in the direction I'm going? This all looks good. Okay, let's continue in that direction. Let's pour in more resources. And as I said, naturally, the resources get attracted to whatever you're committed to. That means that it's very important to hide ongoing issues which could be problematic and hiding alternatives. It also helps if you have some sort of coordinated process of positive outlook. Yeah, it looks good. There's all sorts of IP that make it difficult for you to change the direction you're going in. A minefield, say don't go there. FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's something called a pattern thicket. The difference between a minefield and a pattern thicket, both of them mean you have a lot of small patterns. The difference is that a minefield tells you don't go in here. A thicket, you're already stuck in it. So psychological double down means that once your competitor started working in that direction, even though the going is difficult, they're having some success. You know, they want to continue, even though if they threw everything away and did something else would be good. There's some sort of landscape and climate and other context I'm not going to go into now, but we do have a different talk on it. You can rearrange it to make change more difficult. And like I said about making the decision, if you know who's making the decision and what information they use and you contaminate it, you can help them. So what is commitment? Okay, I mentioned before it's pouring in resources, but commitment is not just words. Commitment is when you actually allocate resources, money, equipment, people. Commitment means that your company structure is good for one thing and not good for another. It means that your relationships with customers and suppliers are suitable for one thing and not for another. The company has a culture and it has a vision. Culture is very difficult to change. Vision, it's easy to change the vision statement, but actually changing it takes time. Your employees, they might be trained for one thing or for another. They might be selected. The know-how that your company has, know-how takes time to develop. You don't do it in a minute. All of these are types of commitment which add up and we'll see in a minute. Now, why is it so important to talk about these different types of commitment? Because you have general commitment and you have specific commitment. General means, yes, our company is committed. Specific means that we can identify which part of the company or what commitment that the company made is tying down the whole company. And that's where we want to aim the IP. We want to keep that thing committed. Let's say a supplier. We want to make sure that you stay with that supplier. And commitment is not the same as inertia. Okay, inertia means I'm just continuing doing what I did before for whatever reason. People don't want to change. Commitment is when we're actually doing stuff. We actually have a sunk cost and we have difficulty changing. And then what happens? You're trapped. So how does this happen? You might not have the resources you need, your competitor, of course, to change the directions you're going in. It could be that your management or your investors are not willing to support this change. It could be an inherent contradiction in the company. You have a brand of cheapest airline flights ever. And now you realize that you have to make it into best airline flights ever. It's a problem. You already built this brand. Or it could simply be time constraints. Okay, so imagine a situation where you can change direction. It's only going to take you 2 years. And by then, you're not going to be the first one in the market. You're going to be the second one or the fifth one in the market. So how do we use IP? One thing we can do is we can do a ring of IP around what you're doing so you can't change. Another thing we can do, even if the trap isn't closed, we can pretend that it's closed and make a lot of noise. We can use IP to drain resources which you would otherwise use for pivoting. For example, if you sue a company, it is difficult for them, small company for sure, to simultaneously handle a lawsuit, which for patents is very expensive, and change their product. They have to maybe, but it's difficult. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to encourage more commitment with IP. For example, if you sue a third party for a different solution, what does that do to your competitor? It makes them say, it's so good we didn't go in that direction because then we'd be sued as well. Exactly. So why is this competitor trapped by you? Mintzberg and friends define a strategic decision as one which is important either in terms of the action, the resources committed, or precedents. But basically, your opponent made a strategic decision to go in a different way. Maybe they didn't think it was a trap. Maybe they should continue thinking it's not a trap, and we should use IP to keep them where they are. Some companies, they commit without thinking about it. Some companies can be tricked into committing by you. And if they don't feel trapped, you can pop out some surprise IP, and now they feel trapped. Reminding you that it's not clear who is inside the cage and who is outside. And in our world, which deals with invention, innovation by your competitor, or even changes in the world, can cause this commitment strategy to fail, which means you have to continuously adapt your IP to what is happening in the world. And I'll say a few words later how to prevent them from innovating. Great. What do? We trapped our competitor. Now let's take advantage of the competitor. So here's some actions that you can take. And I'm going to distinguish actions from goals, and you'll see in a minute. I can lower the price, and now the competitor can't compete. Let's say they have production costs of $100 a unit, and I lower my price to $90. They've committed to that product, and I have a different product which is way cheaper, and they simply can't compete. I can sue them for IP infringement or other lawsuits. I can come out with new technology. Okay, my competitor doubled down on lithium batteries and built a $10 billion factory for making lithium batteries. And now I unveil my new technology of iron batteries, which cost less and don't require such a big factory. They're stuck with their commitment. I can encourage the government to push through a new regulation, which is bad for the design they're going for. I can do a marketing attack. If they're committed, they might have a critical supplier. I can steal that supplier. I can block it using IP. Or we can take advantage in a more, I don't know, amenable way. For example, I can call them up and say, listen, you're trapped by your own commitment. How about we collaborate? How about I give you a license? How about I buy you for a reasonable sum? How about I sell my product, which uses your product? Okay, now we're working together. So I started off by saying that this strategy is done for a reason. So what is the reason that we want? So here's some examples of goals. If I have a specific competitor in mind, going back to that table. So Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, he said that if his competitor were drowning, he'd stick a hose in his mouth and turn on the water. Maybe what we want to do is simply cause damage to the competitor. Maybe we want to force a competitor to leave a market. You can see what happened with Sega. Maybe we want to sell the competitor something, which we make. Maybe we want to force a collaboration. Okay? Maybe we want to force a merger. Maybe we have an ecosystem and we need somebody else to develop it. And one of the ways of doing it is if I force my competitor to commit to a part of the ecosystem that I don't want to work on. Now that the competitor is stuck there, they have no choice but to do their job, which is to improve the ecosystem. Maybe the goal is to give us time, and I use that time to build a better IP position, better business position, improve my technology, and so on, compared to that competitor. Here's an example. What if I have a herd of competitors? So one of the things I might try to do with these commitments is the goal is that I should become the standard setter. So how do I become the standard setter? If I cause a lot of my competitors to go in the wrong direction, I can move ahead and get patents on the standard, and that's wonderful. If I have a herd, maybe I want the herd to build an ecosystem. Maybe I want to milk them for money. Maybe I want to make the herd smaller. One of the easy ways to make a herd smaller is reduce the profit margin. So you have fewer players because there's an economy of size, but none of them is significant because none of them are making a big profit. And sometimes I want the herd simply as a price anchor. Okay? I have a lot of people selling the product at $10 a unit. Everybody knows it's a garbage, so I can charge $15 a unit. But I need these people selling for $10, otherwise I couldn't. So I spoke about goals as, I have a specific goal in mind, but I want to say a word about the goals of a strategy as such. And one of the goals of a strategy is to put your opponent in a place where all the choices that they can make are good for you. Okay? And I show here a picture of forking in chess. Okay? When you move the knight to here, and you simultaneously threaten the king with check and the rook, whichever choice your opponent takes is a bad choice for them. Okay? So one of the goals is to cause my competitor to commit to a position where the choices that they have are bad. Sometimes, and this is also a good example, since my competitor is committed, they can't avoid their commitment, and I give them a choice. I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. I'll make you an offer you have to refuse. Okay? And you lose. Sometimes I use commitment in order to either take away the ability to decide or to change the decision maker. If I force you to commit to a particular customer-facing feature, you can't change it because your customers have decided that you don't exist without that feature. So the decision maker is not the company anymore, it's a market. And like I said, sometimes I can change the decision maker from a division head to a CEO or to your investor. That's wonderful. This is also related to, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing correctly, Zugzwang, where your opponent is forced to make a move even though the move is bad. Okay, and our goal is perhaps to force our opponent to make bad moves, and as long as the commitment is solid, the opponent can't avoid doing that. It's like when you drive on the highway and the next exit is in 20 miles and there's a traffic jam. And then there's another traffic jam. And then the road is broken up and there's only sharp rocks. And then there's a crazy driver. You have to continue, but it's not good for you. Decided to show some charts which reflect what I've been talking about. If I'm trying to cause commitment, the internal forces which cause commitment and external forces. Each one of these is basically a small state diagram of the competitor. And the blue ones are external forces, like who's giving money, what do people expect, and what threat do you feel from outside. And the internal forces are things like resources, abilities, and will. And what I call the trap line is, once you get past this line, your company is committed. And your regular competitor might be doing like this. And if we use IP correctly, and I won't go into details of what's changing inside the chart, the IP is an external force, usually, not always, but usually, which increases significantly his commitment and level of commitment compared to this trapping line. So you can look at this and ask yourself, am I doing it or not? Now, if we're trying to force somebody to commit, it means they have a decision tree that they're using. I'm going to talk more about it some other time. But here's a decision tree which my competitor has to use. He builds a proof of concept, and then they have to decide technology 1 or technology 2. After they choose a technology, they have to decide which markets they're going for. After that, when to markets, they have to choose a design, and then surprise. So here's different ways of using IP in order to guide the competitor to commit and then be surprised. Technology 1, either using IP or rumors or whatever, I can say it's not good. Maybe I have here a minefield. So when he has to choose technology 1 or 2, he chooses technology 2. Now he has to choose between market 1 and market 2. I cause him to believe that market 1 is bigger than it actually is. I cause him to believe that the pathway to get to market number 2, maybe by some publication, is long and convoluted. So I went to market 1. Now, the reality is that it's much easier to do design 2s than design 1. Okay, it's very convoluted. But I have a rumor saying that it's very easy to do it. And here, I put some IP, so you'd be scared to go in this direction. And once you committed to technology and a market and a particular design, then I surprise you with IP infringement. Of course, each one of the decision points on the tree can have its own IP or non-IP issue waiting for you. And the tree, of course, is much more complex than this. But the point is, if you know what the decisions are and how they'll be taken and when they'll be taken, you can use IP to help guide that. Another word on what IP is doing. Okay, you might have noticed that I kept on saying use IP for this, use IP for that. Yes, IP is a supporting actor in this strategy and actually in many other strategies. In this particular strategy, we're using IP in order to encourage and strengthen commitment, and more generally, in order to guide the competitor in the correct direction. More generally, the way IP can support a strategy, I have a cute little list here. One thing is, I want to prevent the discovery of alternatives. Remember, the problem is that the competitor might find a different way of doing things. So using trade secrets, for example, I can make it less likely for them to discover other ways of doing things. I can prevent them from doing innovation by having ready-made IP, or if I see that innovation might happen, I can preempt it by doing it myself. What if this strategy fails? It might. I can use IP to provide a fallback, support for a fallback strategy. The world and the opponent are always changing. IP is sometimes more adaptable than other things like marketing or building factories or R&D. In general, I can support alternative strategies, even not as a fallback position, especially if we're dealing with a herd of competitors. It could be, lots of them that I need. What happens when we're done? The competitor committed and he agreed to whatever we wanted. There's going to be a phase 2. Maybe ecosystem orchestration. The IP can prepare for it. Definitely, if my strategy succeeds, IP can be used to take advantage, licensing, and so on. More generally, IP will put me in a better position for the future and will also give me, the CEO, tools that they can use in the future. I took the goal table and I filled it in based on what we talked about for the JVC VHS story. And what do I do? Followers, I'm going to use the IP to license technology. It's not a commitment strategy. My peers, I'm going to make them commit to a bad choice, and the leader, I'm going to make him commit to a bad choice. That's particular competitors like Sony. Existing herd, they're not peers and not leaders in that particular case. The future, I'm going to use the followers to grow my ecosystem. I'm going to use IP to keep peers followers and not peers. And if there is an existing leader in the future, I'm going to try to use IP to commit them to become a follower, an ecosystem player. I want to guide them away from leading in my field. Another chart. H1, each one is 6 months. You need to have a timeline. Okay, this is kind of like a plan. So here's an expected timeline. Somebody's going to choose a technology, choose a market, get feedback from the market, choose a design, do product market fit, and scale. What we're going to do, the IP people, is over here, we're going to file a minefield. Here, we're going to publish problems. Here, we're going to get an IP on design and also publish some rumors. And at the end, we're going to surprise them with infringement. What are we going to measure and how are we going to measure? I didn't fill it in, but I did fill in what we expect to see commitment of the competitor on the scale of 1 to 10, where 5 means that changing your direction is very painful. So at the beginning, there's a small commitment, but by the time you choose a design, it's big. Once you have product market fit, it's even bigger. And once you're committed to scaling in a certain direction, it's really irrevocable. These two lines, which I didn't fill in because, no room on the slide, us are going to do all sorts of things. The world is going to do things, events, and we're going to have to respond to them. We're going to do things, and we need to respond to them. And the competitor might do things which we need to respond to. So just for example, for the world, here new technology might come out. We're going to need to use IP in order to block it. Here, the market might change. We need to use IP to reduce the appeal of the new market to the competitor. Let's say you're the competitor and somebody's using this against you. What can you do? Well, we're IP people. So we can use IP to generate strategic flexibility, different talk. We can do periodic checks to make sure that we're not being lulled or nudged, especially using IP, into a commitment. And if we detect it, so we have to look a little bit deeper into the future and see what we're going to do. I don't know if it's good or bad, but if you made a bad commitment in the past, you're less likely to make a commitment in the future. That can be bad because you need to make a commitment. So why don't we make you look bad so you're not going to make a new commitment? FUD. IP has an effect of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If inside my company, I clarify to the decision makers why they shouldn't be scared of IP, why the uncertainty is not so big, and why there's not so much doubt, I really weaken the ability of IP to cause commitment. And easy to tell, you need to pivot when you need to pivot. It's very easy to say, so I'm just saying it. What are we going to do against a competitor who tries to do that? Well, one thing is we want IP against cheaper hybrid solutions. Why? Because these are what's easiest to pivot to. We want to make it difficult for them to pivot away from their commitment. We definitely want to get IP against reusing the existing infrastructure for new direction. Okay, because when you pivot, you want to use the existing infrastructure. And of course, we provide more FUD in order to undo this FUD, especially to convince them not to pivot. The pivoting itself is risky. So I was talking about commitment of the company as a whole, but also any particular function can commit, could be the marketing, could be the R&D, and so on. And looking in the mirror, I started off by saying that IP department doesn't need to commit that much. But a lot of people who believe in alignment of IP with business strategy appear to believe that IP which doesn't directly relate to business strategy shouldn't be had. That's a kind of commitment. That means that the IP department is committing to that business strategy, and it's bad for them because that's a business strategy will change. There won't be any IP. And you can definitely encourage it, but it's not too easy. But imagine if you file an opposition against somebody's patent, that gives them a signal that that patent is important, so they should commit more resources into that direction. And it can also cause them to take a position about what's important in that patent, which is not compatible with other activities that we want them to do. And if you know how your competitor is budgeting and making budgeting decisions, you can do commitment not of the company as a whole, just of the marketing department. Okay, you have a marketing department, they have a budget, you cause them to use up all their budget on the wrong thing, that could be good enough. What's your take home? IP can be used to support and enhance typical business strategies. I gave you one example. IP leverages leverage. It restructures decision options, and I'll talk more about that later. In other words, not today. And IP can be used, I showed you lots of different places it can be used, and that's what it's meant for. If you have a business goal and you have a business strategy, it can help you understand what IP will be helpful. And of course, IP strategy is just like any other kind of strategy. You create it, you manage it, you keep track of it, you have a plan, you have a budget, and so on. I want you to think about the following example when we talk about commitment. Mental health is a big problem, especially when we talk about difficult patients, which today are hospitalized. The solution in some places, like maybe New York, is not to hospitalize them. So they live on the street and push other people into the subway. A solution is needed. Maybe telehealth can do it. Arguably, there's two directions. Either the patients are in the hospital and the doctors treat them from far away, or the patients are at home and the doctors treat them from the hospital or wherever it is. So imagine you have a company and you believe that you're going to treat the patients at home. You want to cause your competitors to commit to the patients being hospitalized and the physicians being remote. You have to ask yourself, if I'm planning on this type of business commitment, how will it look like? And of course, how will IP be used to make it look that way? And then after I've done this commitment, how will I take advantage of it? Do you really think that SAH will be able to handle all of the difficult patients in the entire world? Probably not. Okay, I am stopping the recording.